This is CCTV International. Prime Minister's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization holds their first meeting in Kazakhstan.
The event in America
The leader of the Taliban movement denies Osama bin Laden was involved in the terror attacks on the US.
because
Japan's defense agency orders stepped up security at US military, government facilities and companies. And China's Supreme People's Court urges courts around the country to adopt the method of lethal injection in capital punishment cases. Hello and welcome to Worldwide Watch. I'm Lu Xing in Beijing. Topping the news, Prime Ministers of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization have held their first meeting in Kazakhstan city of Alma-Ata. Leaders from China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan signed an agreement promising to push forward the process towards trade and investment liberalization in the region. In their declaration on Friday, the Prime Ministers of the six countries said the stable development of economic and trade cooperation within the organization is in the best interests of all six countries. They also believe that the long-term peace and prosperity in these Asia-European countries will strengthen security and stability in the world. Shanghai Cooperation Organization leaders also expressed a willingness to join hands to combat terrorism, separatism and religious extremism, as well as organized crime and drug trafficking. They offered their condolences to the victims of Tuesday's terror attacks on the United States. Chinese Vice Premier Chen Chi-cheng and U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell exchanged views on counter-terrorism issues in a phone conversation on Thursday. Powell said the U.S. is looking forward to cooperating with China in fighting terrorism. He also expressed his appreciation to the Chinese government and people for their condolences and support following the attacks. The leader of the Taliban movement has denied that Osama bin Laden was involved in the devastating attacks on the United States. He said that neither Afghanistan nor bin Laden had the resources to stage such an attack. Xinhui reports.
Security has been heightened in the Pakistan capital Islamabad as the United States named Afghanistan-based Osama bin Laden as the main suspect in the terror attacks. At a news conference in Islamabad, the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan read out a statement by the Taliban spiritual leader Mullah Omar in which the movement denied bin Laden's involvement.
the event in America itself is indicative to the acquittal of Osama bin Laden, because Osama has no pilots, and where did he train them? Training of pilots is the work of a running government, and only such government has the capacity to do so. In Afghanistan, there is no such possibility for the training.
Zaev said he could not confirm reports that bin Laden was under arrest in Afghanistan. He also said the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan had not been closed. U.S. officials on Thursday pledged to wage the first war of the 21st century against the militants believed responsible for the worst attack ever staged on American soil. Xinhui, CCTV.
Meanwhile, U.S. troops throughout the world are on high alert and have stepped up security around American bases abroad. This comes after Tuesday's terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. In Japan, America's major strategic military base in Asia, security has also been tightened. Ma Jing reports.
Japanese police and U.S. serviceman Yokosuka increased their checks on drivers entering the U.S. base there on Thursday. It follows an order by Japan's defense agency and its national police agency to tighten security at U.S. military, government facilities and companies in Japan. On Okinawa Island, security was also stepped up. A substantial increase in activity was also noticeable at the Kepada Air Base. The increase in security comes as U.S. officials vow to wage the first war of the 21st century against shadowy militants believed responsible for the worst attack ever staged on American soil. U.S. President George W. Bush has vowed to whip terrorism, and investigators have focused on exiled Saudi dissident Osama bin Laden. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell became the first senior official to publicly identify Osama bin Laden as a suspect in Tuesday's airplane attacks. There were about 48,000 American military personnel in Japan. Ma Jing, CCTV.
In Afghanistan, fears of possible U.S. retaliation prompted the United Nations, international diplomats and aid workers to pull out of the Afghan capital of Kabul on Thursday. Steve Nettleton has more.
Diplomats representing 8 aid workers charged by the Taliban with promoting Christianity joined UN staff in evacuating Afghanistan and headed for Pakistan. The plight of the aid workers has been significantly complicated by the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. As they arrived in Islamabad, diplomats said that despite their departure, they will continue with their mission.
Well, there was nothing going on in Kabul when we left. It was quiet, and we are going to continue working on doing everything we can, working with the local authorities to get the detainees released. We're still working on that.
Residents in Kabul are nervously watching the sky, worried the United States may launch a retaliatory strike to punish the Taliban for harboring Osama bin Laden. The Taliban have urged Washington not to attack, saying bin Laden was not involved in Tuesday's terrorism. Steve Nettleton, CCTV.
10 people were taken into police custody in New York's 2 major airports on Thursday. They carried false IDs, and one of them was with a false pilot license. 4 of the suspects were reportedly seen at one of the airports on the day of the hijackings. Our reporter Chen Xiaowei tells us what she has learned and filed this report from New York.
The latest coming from New York airports is that there have been 10 people, approximately 10 people arrested at the airports. At LaGuardia Airport, there have been 5 to 6 people arrested, and at JFK Airport, there have been 3 to 4 people arrested, and one of them is a woman. These people have been reported to carry knives and flying manuals and false IDs, and one man, at least one man, had tried to get on an airplane using a false ID of a pilot. Now, these people have been questioned by authority, and they are suspected of trying to carry out another hijack activity. Now, elsewhere in New York, the death toll has risen to 184. That is 184 confirmed dead. But the missing has been listed as 5,000 by Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Elsewhere in New York, the city has been under a thick cloud of, most of all, horror. Today, one day alone, there have been 90 bomb threats, all of which have turned out to be false. However, people are in such a frenzy that whether it's subway station or hotel or airport or school, as soon as somebody sees an unattended package, whether it's a post package or suitcase or even a lunch bag, it could cause a panic, and people start panic and running. The latest from the White House is that President George W. Bush will visit New York City tomorrow, and it's still yet to see whether that will cause any security alarm. As of the mood of New Yorkers in Union Square, people have come to express longing for the lost loved ones. And as of what people think of this whole incident, perhaps this is a telling story. When one of the New York reporters, local TV station reporters, interviewed an Israeli man stranded at JFK airport waiting to go home to Israel. The young Israeli said on TV, "Now the Americans can finally feel what we have always felt like." And a man sitting next to me watching this TV, an American man said, "Well, if not for you, we wouldn't have to feel this way." This is Chen Xiaowei reporting from New York for CCTV.
U.S. President George W. Bush has declared Friday a national day of mourning and remembrance. More than 4,700 people have been counted as missing on Thursday following the crash of the two hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center in New York. Rescue workers are continuing their search for survivors 2 days after the terrorist attack. The rescue efforts have been hampered by a brief burst of heavy rain and lightning. David Rathbun has the story.
New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani said the number included those on board the two planes, the number provided by companies searching for employees, rescue workers, and those reported unaccounted for by phone from friends and families. The blast has left many New Yorkers with a sense of fear and panic.
I've been having nightmares. I work on 32nd and Broadway. I saw the actual second plane hit, and I walked home from Manhattan on Tuesday, and I'm totally devastated, and my prayers go out to all the families that was lost, and really.
Meanwhile, 5 firefighters have been found alive and well after 2 days beneath the rubble.
We were urged to get a urgent message to the command post that they found members.
Okay.
Because they were in a remote area from us. So it's all radio communication.
But that makes only 10 people who have been found alive in the debris from the collapsed buildings. As some tired rescuers were getting off duty, a few stopped to express their feelings of relief, but stopped short of mentioning new hope for finding more survivors. Airports in the U.S. remained empty and flights continued to be canceled on Thursday for security purposes. The U.S. authorities have now imposed tougher security requirements for airports and airlines. David Rathbun, CCTV.
It is reported that flight recorders were found from the plane that hit the Pentagon. And the Pentagon said that the fire caused by the plane attack on Tuesday morning had caused the deaths of 190 people so far. The U.S. Congress agreed on Friday to set aside $40 billion for rescue efforts. This was double the amount decided upon on the day before. The funds will enable President George W. Bush to counter and prosecute domestic and international terrorists, boost transportation security, rebuild the damaged Pentagon, and clean up the debris of the World Trade Center. Meanwhile, anger against Muslim and Arab groups in the United States has mounted following Tuesday's devastating attacks. Despite a public plea for tolerance from President George W. Bush on Thursday, violence towards Arab Americans and Muslim communities is growing across the country. Zhou Yu reports.
By Wednesday evening, Muslim groups in the country had received more than 100 reports of harassment against people in Muslim dress and those who look to be of Middle Eastern descent. In Huntington, New York, a 70-year-old man tried to run over a Pakistani woman in a shopping mall parking lot. He followed the woman into a store and threatened to kill her. Earlier Thursday, the Islamic Society of Dayton, Texas, was hit by a Molotov cocktail. No one was hurt in the incident. Damage was estimated at $2,500. In Palos Heights, Illinois, a man who used a blunt and a machete to attack a Moroccan gas station attendant was charged with a hate crime. Responding to the mounting complaints, U.S. President George W. Bush on Thursday urged the public to step back from venting their animosity against Arab Americans and the Muslim communities in this country. He called on American citizens to treat them with the respect they deserve. Zhou Yu, CCTV.
U.S. airlines were permitted to resume commercial flights on a limited basis as some airports were reopened late Thursday morning Eastern Time. But this comes as 3 New York City airports, JFK, LaGuardia and Newark, were closed for FBI activity late on Thursday afternoon. David Rathbun has this story.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta said the U.S. airports would be open and U.S. commercial flights resumed after the government implemented a range of new federal security requirements. As part of the tightened security, Mineta asked the military for members of its elite counter-terrorist Delta Force to assist federal air marshals who will ride on some domestic flights. The measures also include a ban on knives and a ban on curbside check-ins. Meanwhile, in Washington, President George W. Bush and his wife Laura visited victims of the attack on the Pentagon in Washington's Hospital Center. Bush said meeting with the government employees of the Defense Department was a sobering experience.
Some of the folks could talk, and they described the horror of the incident in the moment. They talked about escaping, going through fire, and crawling through debris. That it's clear that they were fighting for their survival.
The U.S. Federal Aviation Administration halted all commercial air traffic for the first time after knife-wielding hijackers seized 4 commercial airliners on Tuesday. 2 of the planes slammed into and destroyed New York's 110-story Twin Towers. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon. David Rathbun, CCTV.
We'll take a short break and other international developments coming up right after that. Stay with us. The Republic of Korea completes its part of a railway that may relink the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And China's Supreme People's Court urges courts to adopt the method of lethal injection in capital punishment cases. Welcome back to Worldwide Watch. The Republic of Korea has completed the construction of its part of a railway which will relink Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Zhou Yu has more details on this story.
Trucks thunder through the heat as South Korean army engineers and civilians work flat out on the railroad intended to help put North-South relations back on track.
With systematic management and strict quality control, we have successfully completed the railroad construction on the south side of the demilitarized zone.
South Korean President Kim Dae-jung has said the railway will significantly improve economic prospects on the peninsula. However, it remains unclear when the DPRK will link up the railway, which has been abandoned in the north of the peninsula since May, in response to a tougher U.S. policy on Pyongyang. The completion of the railway in the south comes just as DPRK and South Korea are set to resume bilateral talks from Saturday to next Tuesday. The long-expected talks will cover discussions over aviation, industry, fisheries and railways. Zhou Yu, CCTV.
Japan confirmed today that it will not hand over the former Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori to Peru. As Liao Liang reports, Fujimori has so far been sheltered from extradition attempts by his dual Japanese-Peruvian citizenship and by the fact that the 2 countries have no extradition treaty.
On Thursday, Peru's Supreme Court issued the arrest warrant for Fujimori on suspicion of his involvement in a mass murder by military squads of 15 people believed to have cooperated with a guerrilla group in Lima in 1991. He is also wanted for his part in the murders of 10 people in Lima the following year. But there is no extradition treaty between Japan and Peru.
We need to see the legal procedures first, and we cannot predict what will happen next at this stage. It's not the time to say what kind of measures Japan will take.
According to the Peruvian media, 63-year-old Fujimori, who fled to Japan last November, is on an international wanted list circulated by Interpol. The former Peruvian president has denied any wrongdoing and said he was a victim of political persecution and would not get a fair trial in Peru. Liao Liang, CCTV.
Cash-strapped Australian airline Ansett Australia has been grounded, stranding thousands of passengers and promoting a 3-hour strike at Sydney Airport. The financial collapse of the second-largest domestic airline in the country comes only weeks before a national election is expected to be called. Guo Chun has this story.
Administrators appointed to the failed Air New Zealand subsidiary grounded the airline early on Friday after deciding it had insufficient cash and facilities to fund its operations. They said they had spent a sleepless night seeking buyers for the assets of the debt-ridden carrier, which was losing $670,000 daily. Workers turned up for their shifts but got locked out. About 55,000 passengers were stranded in airports around the country, and the chaos spread as transport workers went on strike for 3 hours at Sydney Airport after news of the collapse. Angry workers used cars to block an Air New Zealand flight which had been due to take New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark back to New Zealand. The New Zealand national carrier, which had been struggling to find fresh capital, appointed administrators to run Ansett late on Wednesday before writing off its entire investment in Australia's second-ranked carrier. Ansett's suspension covers key domestic and overseas units Ansett Australia and Ansett International, as well as its regional and outback services. Guo Chun, CCTV.
Education ministers and delegates from over 180 nations gathered last week in Geneva for an international conference on education. The delegates faced critical policy choices in working to provide education for all. Liao Liang has this story.
This year's conference focused on the so-called 100 best practices in education from around the world, particularly at initiatives that can be used in many countries or contexts. These include South Africa's 40 Schools project, which assists victims of violence and involves both teachers and students in the promotion of national reconciliation. Conference delegates examined and debated practical policy options on 6 themes. Among them, designing school curricula to fight social exclusion and violence, introducing initiatives to narrow the digital divide, and shaping curricula to recognize cultural and linguistic diversity. The United Nations estimates that on average, an additional $7 billion per year must be spent over the next decade to educate all the children in the world. Liao Liang, CCTV.
Courts across China have been urged by the country's Supreme People's Court to use the method of lethal injection for those found guilty in capital punishment cases. The move is designed to carry out capital punishment in a more humane and scientific way. Cities across China will begin the practice by the end of this year. At that time, the new system will be monitored by leading court officials. This will ensure that executions by injection are conducted in a professional way in accordance with the regulations formulated by the Supreme People's Court. Lethal injection was first given legal status in China on January 1st, 1997. In Beijing, audiences will be treated to a feast of diverse song and dance performance as China's second ethnic theatrical festival kicks off Saturday in the Great Hall of the People. Nearly 40 art troupes will come from across the country, including Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan. It's a showcase of the theatrical arts as well as a grand gathering of 55 ethnic groups. Wang Xinyu has this story.
The drum beats of the Yellow River, from the Tibetan plateau to an ethnic Korean group to the Dai people. The evening gala will feature diverse drum beats and dances from 55 ethnic groups. Throughout Chinese history, Chinese people have used drums to entertain, to celebrate, and to improve morale. Now the drum is also a symbol of solidarity, progress, and a bright future.
21 years have passed since the first National Ethnic Theatrical Festival was held. Great changes have taken place in the life of the ethnic people, and the ethnic art had developed greatly in the past 2 decades.
The opening gala is composed of 10 parts, highlighting the unrestrained dances of the Mongolian people, the gentle and graceful scenery of southern China, and the staunch power of the Himalayas. Much of the choreography was created by renowned ethnic artists. From September the 15th to 25th, nearly 3,000 ethnic artists will stage over 80 performances in major theaters all over Beijing. And the ethnic artists will also perform in Beijing's suburbs, communities, factories, and schools. According to a census last year, the 55 ethnic groups account for 8.4% of China's population of nearly 1.3 billion. Wang Xinyu, CCTV.
And now let's move on to financial news. China's major stock markets ended mixed today. The Shanghai and Shenzhen indices fell. Meanwhile, Hong Kong stocks finished higher, led by a rebound in oversold China Mobile. Japan's Nikkei index jumped 4% to end above the key 10,000 mark. In European markets last night, stocks closed largely higher after uneasy trading. With the US markets closed for a third session, investors searched for directions again. Now for a closer look at the numbers. That's almost it for this edition of CCTV's Worldwide Watch. But international weather coming up still after this. I'm Lu Xin in Beijing. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to CCTV International.